All right, so now we're going to talk about bellows, breath holds, and navigators. This is dealing with that pesky problem we have within MRI livers, and that is breathing, right? How do we get around breathing? Fortunately, our patients have to breathe. Can't get away with that. But what we can do is figure out the best ways to kind of get around that. So breath hold is the simplest. It's the one you're going to see the most often. People are going to be, take a deep breath in and hold it. We scan, and we get as much information as we can in that time period. People can hold their breath sometimes 20, 30 seconds. Sometimes you're going to have somebody who can't hold their breath at all. So you have to kind of judge whether or not how well your breath holds are going to go. If breath holds are the only thing you are using and the only thing you know how to use, then that's going to come back to beat you if you get somebody who has COPD, right? Or, you have somebody who has asthma or some other kind of breathing problem. Then, you want to know about more than just the breath hold. So advantage of the breath hold is unlike flow artifacts, peristalsis, a patient is able to completely stop their motion if they hold their breath. So we can get a perfectly great sequence as long as they're able to hold their breath. Disadvantage? The big disadvantage is our time frame. We're now having people hold their breath for around 20 seconds, and maybe we do a couple of acquisitions, so we do, maybe 3 acquisitions for a total of 1 minute. Well, if I show you any other sequence that you run, in the shoulder or in the ankle or, even in the brain, I say, hey, you only have a 1 minute sequence for all the sequences you run, you'd probably say our quality is going to be horrible. Now, the good news here is that the abdomen balances it out because the liver has so many mobile hydrogen protons. There's so much fat and water in the abdomen area that we get lots of signal, tons of SNR. So we can afford to run some pretty short exams, and you can have some good breath holds. And there's no way to run every exam without a breath hold. Usually, if you're going to run a liver series, you're going to have some breath holds at least. Bellows. If you haven't... Whoa. Okay. So our bellows, these are straps that we wrap around the patient, and as they breathe, it breaks the pressure within the tube. So there's a tube, and as they breathe, the tube ends up getting smaller, and then it tells us that the patient is exhaling. And so with that, what we end up being able to do is be able to tell when the patient is breathing because of this tube that we wrap around them. And it looks like a black rubber tube, accordion usually kind of style, on Philips. If you're running on a Philips machine, it's a little air pillow. There's pictures of this in the actual the lecture. And as they breathe, they crush the pillow or they crush the tube as they breathe, which tells the machine that you're breathing out. And then we only collect echoes during one part of the respiratory cycle. So whether that is when somebody's breathing out, inspiration or expiration, usually it's expiration because the patient, there's a point between inspiration and expiration when you are finished breathing in before you start breathing out again. Or I'm sorry, when you finish breathing out, there's like a pause before you start breathing in again. So we only collect echoes at that time. Now that means it could take us 3 to 4 minutes to get the same scan that we got in, maybe 40 seconds from a breath hold. But the big advantage, no having to hold their breath, so the patient can just breathe normally. So the advantage of the bellows is that means the patient does not have to hold their breath, especially if you have somebody who has really big problems breathing. Disadvantage is that the bellows usually aren't that awesome. It's usually hard to set them up, and they usually don't do a great job. Some places I've been able to get bellows work very well, and some they work just horribly. Last is my absolute favorite, the Navigator. So what a Navigator is that if we were to be looking at somebody that we're scanning and here's their liver, yes, behold my awesome drawing. What happens is we put this little box that detects when they're breathing because it detects when the liver moves up while they're exhaling, and then the liver moves down because it's part of the diaphragm when they're inhaling. And what this little box does is that it's constantly scanning this area, and it's telling us when they're at the point of inspiration and when they're at the point of expiration. And then just like the bellows, we end up scanning, usually just at the point of expiration is when we'll collect echoes. So the advantages is that just like the bellows, patients don't have to hold their breath. The big advantage of the Navigator over the Bellows is that there's no physical equipment, so you're not trying to strap a pillow or a tube around somebody. And I think they work much, much, much better than the Bellows do. A big disadvantage is if the person has an unsteady breathing pattern, then it usually doesn't end up working out so well. So Navigators are my favorite. I don't like the Bellows. Place I work now, we don't even use the Bellows. But if you have a Navigator, I suggest if you have downtime and you want to play with it and your techs are okay with that, try to figure out Navigators. They're really helpful. They're really nice. If you ever scan with me somewhere, if that ever ends up happening, you will definitely be using Navigators. And that's about it for our Betholds, Navigators, and Bellows lecture.